Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. This is Alex coming back at you with another one. The Chargers lose 20-10 to the Baltimore Ravens on Sunday Night Football, effectively all but kind of ending their playoff hopes. They are now 4-7. Going into this game per Sumer Sports, there was a 21.2% chance to make the playoffs with a win against Baltimore, and now it is at 8.8%. And to me, the story of the game is just the Chargers continue to kind of find ways to beat themselves. They lose the turnover battle 4-0 tonight. Technically, one of those was on a Herbert interception before the half on a Hail Mary. So if you want to say 3-0, fine. But a big Herbert fumble, big Eckler fumble, big Keenan fumble, really kills multiple drives. And the Chargers just find themselves kind of beating themselves on offense, struggling to get back into it. On defense, I mean, this was probably one of the better Chargers defensive efforts of the season, outside of that final drive where they kind of needed to stop. And, but anytime you hold the Ravens to 20, which, if you had told the Chargers fans before that in this game, people would have taken that as a result. But, ultimately, this game is much more on the shoulders of the offense, considering how many, 3-and-out stops the Chargers were able to get, and ultimately they got a lot of quarterback pressures. They, were able to kind of pester Lamar more so in the second half, more so in the first half, but they were able to get in his face pretty consistently all night and do whatever they were able to do with him. Khalil Mack turned the clock back and had one of his best games with 2 sacks, a bunch of pressures as well. So, at the end of the day, I don't think you could put this one on the defense. There are some interesting defensive things to talk about, which we'll get to at some point in the show. But I do think we have to start the game with the offense and just everything that has happened. And to me, it all stems from a lack of identity. And I don't really know if they know what team they kind of want to be. I think when it comes to, the run game, for example, right, they have realized, I think late in games that they should abandon the run game, right? And we saw it again in this one, right? On the Chargers' most successful touchdown drive of the night, there was no Eckler run on 1st and 10 outside of the red zone, right? They got into the red zone and then kind of let Eckler do his thing, before that Gerald Everett touchdown. But, when they kept everything through the air and the pass pro worked, sort of as we saw against Green Bay, this offense can work, right? As exemplified by that drive. But when it doesn't, and the run game is bad, pass pro was bad, we'll talk about the receiver room in a second. All of these things combined, it's just not good. And yeah, we have to talk about pass protection just because I think it's clear that, at this point, I don't know what the PFF grades are going to be when we wake up tomorrow morning. I've already woken up tomorrow morning, but I mean when the numbers come out later this afternoon on my side of the world. But, this was a pretty bad performance from the offensive line, and the Ravens were able to get a lot of stunts, a lot of simulated pressures, and, really bother particularly the Chargers' interior of that line. This was a game where Pipkins gave up 4, Slater gave up 3, Clapp gave up 3, Zion and Sallier with 2 each. So the Chargers ultimately allow, if I'm doing the numbers right here, 14 pressures on Justin Herbert again. A lot of critical sacks and mistakes as well. There was the 4th and 6 cover 0 blitz where the Ravens sent a free rusher, and the offensive, not the offensive line, but the pass protection sort of, kind of failed them on that play, and Justin Herbert didn't necessarily check out of it into something like max protect either. So they were just getting that kind of pressure in their face all night, and at this point, it's really disappointing with the offensive line because I had such high hopes for them kind of going into the season. It's like you get the return of Slater. You know, pretty much as long as you had Lindsley kind of as that linchpin, this whole thing should be working a lot better. But I think we've seen, and I know people will keep going back to Lindsley, and he's a huge part of why this offensive line isn't working communications wise. But we've seen enough football without him also, and to evaluate how the rest of the guys are playing to be like, yeah, this hasn't been Slater's best season. Hasn't been Pipkin's best season. Would say that was last year. And Zion and Jamari, in terms of like pass protection, have not been as good as expected. And I think some of that is about switching the sides of the line that, they did this preseason and then it not working without Corey, but they really have struggled in particular, like in the run blocking and then, giving up pass pressures too. And I'm really struck by just the pass rush breakdowns in 2-minute drills. Got to have it situations. We saw it against Green Bay, saw it against Detroit. But when there's 2 minutes left, I'm almost betting it will be a sack or it'll be like a pressure that makes Herbert throw the ball away, whatever it is. Like it just feels kind of inevitable for this Chargers offensive line to break down in some way like that. So, Steven is more the guy who evaluates the offensive line play, but anyone watching just knows that this Chargers team, from a run game, from a pass standpoint, like it's just not working right now. And I don't know what the solution is outside of they're not getting Corey Lindsley back. Like at some point you need this offensive line to gel more, but we also have a 2-month sample size without Corey Lindsley at this point. And I think it'd be pretty unrealistic to expect them to improve at this point down the stretch. It's just more that Kellen Moore has to make his own adjustments and figure out what he's going to do. But Kellen Moore on Thursday, before this game, sort of said of the pass protection issues, like, yeah, it's on me to adjust. But, when you talk about why we can't run a 2-minute offense, like, that's why we can't run a 2-minute offense. And the Chargers, had even more pass protection issues in this game. So offensive line has not worked as expected. Let's talk about the run game. Justin Herbert, once again, as a runner, outgains all of the other rushers combined. Justin Herbert with 47 yards, Eckler with 32 yards, Joshua Kelly with 8, Darius Davis with 2 carries for -1 yards. So the other Chargers, non-Herbert runners, ended up on the day having 39 yards. Goes without saying, but I think it's going to be pretty tough to win that way in the league. And actually, when the first drive happened, and the Chargers drove down and kicked the field goal in the drive, they probably should have had a touchdown with the late hit out of bounds and that kind of stuff. They looked like they, came out kind of with this intensity on the offensive line and, just that first set of like 15 scripted plays, like in general, like they meant business and they looked like they really wanted it from an offensive line standpoint, from an Eckler running back standpoint. I thought that was Eckler's best drive in a while. Herbert was playing pretty well. And then they just kind of like, leaned into some of their old habits to some extent in the running game in particular. And I don't know, it's a sinking ship because obviously if the pass pro and the run blocking isn't good on the offensive line and you also have Eckler, kind of regressing, there's really no solution to this. I know some people have pointed out that they sat Isaiah Spiller and, they should give him more of a role, but Isaiah Spiller has essentially had 2 years to like carve out a role on this team throughout offseason processes and during in-season processes. And there's a reason he's not playing. And he, it's primarily because he can't play special teams, to be honest. We've also seen Elijah Dotson start over him for that reason. So it's not like this running game would be magically better if Isaiah Spiller, I know the guy that people saw in college is one thing, but Isaiah Spiller in the pros has been a really poorly efficient runner. And, if Eckler and Kelly are in this state behind this line, there's no reason to expect that Spiller would be much better. But I get the point of wanting to try something different, but the wanting to try something different at this point is like hoping Herbert bails you out of some of these situations and, kind of can throw into a game and save you, right? Like that's kind of the hope for the Chargers at this point. And, it's pretty understandable in the second half. They largely, went away from the run game, and that was probably their more successful half on offense, relatively speaking, considering the amount of turnovers in the first half. So yeah, I don't know. I think this run game is just kind of terminally bleeped for this season. I would like to see something more from it, but I think we're at the point now, and this is part of why I think there's no kind of identity on this team. Is Kellen Moore wanted really Staley and Moore talked about wanting to marry the run and the pass. The run and the pass are divorced at this point. I just, it never flows well when they start drives with a 1 or 2 yard Eckler run. And I talked about this with Arjun after the Lions game, and it's just such a negative play to set you back when you have to go into 2nd and 8, 2nd and 9 each time. Some offenses are kind of built to, overcome that. If you look at like Philadelphia, if they have a bad run or whatever on first down, but like the Chargers are not one of those offenses clearly in terms of like how they're engineered. So that I think is the biggest thing in terms of this, run pass marriage right now, and just the total lack of identity. And honestly, outside of Herbert and Allen and a couple key players, this offense just feels lifeless. And it sucks to say that, but it is what it is. Let's talk about the receiving game. Keenan Allen, 14 for 106. He's awesome. Had the fumble. That was costly. Gerald Everett, 4 for 43. Austin Eckler, 5 for 32. Alex Erickson, 1 for 17. Quentin Johnston, 1 for 7. Gerald Everett had a touchdown, by the way, 4 for 43 and a touchdown. Joshua Kelly, 2 catches for 6 yards. Jalen Guyton, 1 for 4. Jalen Guyton was targeted 5 times. And Darius Davis, 1 catch for 2 yards on what was a screen. So okay. Keenan Allen was awesome. So let's talk about someone who wasn't awesome. Quentin Johnston. I don't really know what to make of this situation anymore. But basically, Quentin Johnston, was unable to get separation largely throughout the night. Had that 1 catch for 7 yards, I think, in the third quarter. But the Chargers went back to Quentin Johnston late in the third quarter with about 2 minutes left. And he dropped a pass and then kind of went down, grabbing at what looked like to be his midsection, his ribs. And, we never saw him after that. But we also never got an official injury designation from the Chargers about what happened or anything like that until Staley's post-game presser, where he said that Quentin Johnston was dealing with some kind of rib issue and he did not go back into the game. But when he was pressed on whether that was a medical staff decision or a coaching staff decision by Daniel Popper, he did indicate that Quentin Johnston could have gone back into the game, but it was the coaching staff who decided to not put him back in, noting the flow of the game, noting, the rib issue, as he called it. But the Chargers, with about a quarter left of football, did not put Quentin Johnston back on the field voluntarily, and instead decided to let Alex Erickson and decided to let all of these other guys play. And remember, this is a Chargers team that is down Mike Williams. This is a Chargers team that is down Josh Palmer. Quentin Johnston is getting benched for who exactly, right? And I don't know. And there's no, I kind of said it during the game, but there was no better way for the game to end than how it needed to end, which was the Zay Flowers touchdown to put it out of reach, which is sort of maybe symbolic of the whole evening and the whole season to some extent. As big as a QJ fan as I was, he just has not played up to snuff, and it's been a disaster. There's no other way around it. But for Staley to bench him in this game, I don't even know what that'll do mentally to Quentin Johnston. I'm not saying it's the right or wrong decision, by the way. But the fact that you're already in this place with your first round pick is just, it's not good. We've seen players have bounce back years before, and I know people want to point out Mike Williams this year, but Mike Williams this year was largely affected by surgery that he had and kind of being in and out of the lineup. Quentin's largely been healthy outside of this rib issue that they didn't release an official game time injury report diagnosis for, either on the broadcast or on social media. So the Chargers just decided to bench him. And I don't know why at this point, what at this point there is for Quentin Johnston the rest of the season. I talked about this with Tyler on the show yesterday, but he asked, what are some of the things that you're looking forward to seeing in this offense the rest of the year? Just looking forward to seeing the Chargers the rest of the year. And honestly, at 4-6, we were eliminated from the playoffs before it was 4-7, really, with how this team's been playing. And I just said, I want to see who's going to step up and be a contributor next year. Right. And I added Quentin Johnston to that list. I added a couple other players to that list of just who's really like a keeper on this team. Obviously, yes, they're going to keep Quentin Johnston around for a while because he's a draft pick, but just other players on the team as well, right? Like who, can kind of step up and fill the void and be here for the Chargers in 2024 when they, do their max, shuffling over the offseason to deal with their cap situation, because they went all in for 4-17, and they're going to be affected because of that next year. And, I said Quentin Johnston was one of the people I wanted to watch, and that was just a really disappointing effort from him. And the fact that the coaching staff felt the need to bench him says a lot about how his season's been going. So I have sort of lost hope for, what this season was supposed to be for Quentin Johnston. I hope he turns it around next year. We all hope. But it is scary just how little separation he is creating relative to the history of rookie receivers. And then when he has gotten the ball in recent weeks, the drops being, a similar issue and not improved to the extent they were in college as well. So, pretty disheartening stuff. But, this is a game where you miss Josh Palmer, and man, does this team miss Mike Williams in a big way. There's no other way around that conversation, because it's just tough to watch this receiving core without him. And that's really, if you had to pinpoint one offensive moment where the season went south, it was Mike Williams getting hurt against the Vikings. Because I really truly think since then he's part of their lack of identity problem, as I called it earlier. So yeah, I don't know. Just a bad game on offense as a whole. I don't want to harp too much on it because everybody already knows. But anytime when the defense is able to ultimately hold Lamar Jackson to 18 for 32, 177, one touchdown, and a QBR of 35.9, and you can't take advantage of that, this is what we talk about with the team not being able to play complementary football. And Brandon Staley's talked about it in press conferences as well, where the offense is on and then the defense is off, and the defense is off and the offense is on. So pretty bad from the Chargers standpoint, honestly. Let's get into the defense a little bit before we wrap up. I do want to give credit to just some guys who I think played really well. It's a shame that this Khalil Mack game kind of will be forgotten Khalil Mack had 2 sacks and 6 pressures today. Ultimately, the defense was just getting after it as a whole when you want to look at the defensive line. Khalil Mack with 6 pressures. You had Morgan Fox with 4, Thule with 2, Sebastian Joseph Day and Justin Hollins and Williams each with 1. So everybody essentially combined for, if I'm adding this up correctly, which I should have done before the show, you're looking at about 19 pressures here, which anytime that you get that on Lamar Jackson, and honestly, credit to the defensive line for balling out against this Ravens offensive line. I really didn't expect it, and we've seen the Chargers kind of run into offensive line buzzsaws. It's not that the Ravens is as good as Detroit per se, but they run an offensive lines that have really shut them down and given them problems. But this was ultimately a pretty good day. I thought it would be kind of a rougher game to watch without Joey Bosa, and there were moments in the run game where they kind of ran it to Tule's side, and like it wasn't the best. But ultimately, the defense did what it needed to do tonight, and credit to Brandon Staley in this sense. He did feel the need to change something in his secondary, and benched Michael Davis, benched John Taylor, and put in Isang Bassi and Dean Leonard, and ultimately, kind of won that adjustment. Not obviously didn't win the game, but that single, individual adjustment in the secondary was good. I was very skeptical of how it would work, and Dean Leonard was getting torched early by Odell Beckham. Now, I do think that change was obviously benefited by the day that they had as a pass rush, right? Would that change have been successful if the Chargers didn't get 20 or so pressures? I don't know. But I did feel just in the secondary, there was is certainly in the passing game, more of an understanding of where guys were supposed to be. It was just a matter of whether they were getting beat or not, right? There wasn't this large scale miscommunication throughout the night, like we saw in Green Bay, like we saw in Detroit, and like we saw at various points this year in Tennessee and Miami. So I did think that aspect was at least better. I certainly don't believe Dean Leonard and Isang Bassi are the answers to the secondary in the future. But credit to them for playing pretty well in this game and going step for step with the Ravens receivers, and Odell and Zay, and Isaiah Likely and all those guys. They ultimately did a pretty decent job, except for a couple key critical moments. But given the circumstances, the secondary played better than I thought they would. I really did fear that this was going to be a 100-yard Odell game, 100-yard Zay game, 100-yard everyone game, to be honest. And the Chargers came to play. I don't know what this means for the future of Michael Davis for the rest of the season. I don't know what it means for John Taylor. I assume they're just kind of benched now. I don't know if Staley will want to shuffle the lineup again going into New England, but maybe New England presents more of an opportunity to play some more press man. I don't know. But I think it's pretty surprising at this point that you're in week 12 and there's just this constant rotation and deliberation of who the corners are going to be, and that falls onto Lesko and Staley. Even though it worked out tonight, the fact that you're deciding between playing Michael Davis or Michael Davis and John Taylor, or Isang Bassi and Dean Leonard in week 12, that goes back to how the J.C. Jackson situation blew up in their face, and the Chargers not having an answer or having a call in the event that didn't work out. And, you do kind of see that on the defense. But credit to Bassi, credit to Dean Leonard, and credit to how those guys played tonight. Don't think it's a very sustainable way to win, but it's something. And in general, I thought this was probably a better game for the linebackers at the second level. Not that they were tested as much than Detroit or Green Bay went for Kenneth Murray and Eric Kendricks, but at the end of the day, they weren't picked on that much to really tell what was are they improving in pass coverage? No, I think it's largely the same, but the Ravens just kind of decided to test their offense in other ways. Did pretty okay in the run game, I guess. for the most part. There were, some explosive runs that kind of killed them. Obviously, Zay had one for 37. Keaton Mitchell had one for 29. So, when the defense kind of breaks down on those, it's a little tough to recover. This was probably one of the worst Chargers rush defense efforts, 35 carries for 197 yards, but it wasn't necessarily why they lost the game either in that respect. In terms of Keaton Mitchell yards or something, they ultimately still kept the Ravens out of the end zone for as long as they could for a pretty decent stretch of this game. And the offense just needed to kind of produce more. So yeah, that's about all I honestly got for you guys today. I'll briefly mention Staley's press conference here, but there was I'll just kind of fly through it since I had most of the press conference quotes. So I'll just kind of pull them up on my end and we can talk about all of them, I guess. Brandon Staley on ball security was the difference in the game. 4 turnovers to 0 is going to do that. Says he wasn't surprised about the pass rush. I don't think anyone necessarily was either. Yeah, this was the exact quote on Quentin Johnston. He had an issue with his ribs. He did not go back into the game. It just did not happen. He did not go back into the game. Then when it was pressed on the medical staff, coaching staff decision by Daniel Popper, he did say that it was essentially the coaching staff's decision to not put him back on the field. Brandon Staley says the team's focus is on beating New England. You go get him, man. I think this is an interesting sequence of quotes here. Somebody asked him about how many close losses he's had in his 3rd year as a coach, and he said, "It starts with me. I'm fully responsible, but we need to hang in there." And then he was asked if his messaging is getting across to his team. He said, "They'd be getting blown out of the stadium if my messaging wasn't getting across." So on one hand, you take all responsibility for the close losses, but then still maintain that your messaging is getting through to the team, which, all right. I mean, I'm not sure if based on what I watched tonight, that's true, but okay. Said Herbert gave him a decent enough chance to win. They just ultimately haven't been executing as a whole. Herbert's press conference was kind of largely just the same thing. Said he got pulled into the blue tent because of the red cap concussion check, and then also talked about the 4th and 6 cover 0, 4th and 6 0 blitz a lot. I don't know necessarily what to say other than something about the identity of this team needs to change. Alohi Gilman said this after the Green Bay game, but I've never seen a Chargers team that is as bland and lifeless to watch as this one. The Chargers are always known for this team that's in close games and, exciting, going down to the river, going down to the wire, I should say. And here comes Phillip Rivers. He has no timeouts, 2 minutes left, right? Like that was the reputation of the Chargers for a long time. But at least those teams were fun to watch, man. I'm taken aback by the fact that this team, and outside of really a handful of players, it's really not that fun to watch. They keep games relatively close. This was only their second 2-possession loss of the season. You can just know what is good offensive football and good defensive football when you see it, and the fact that those haven't lined up. And, you just feel like this sheet is going to be pulled out from under you in some way in terms of the team's performances this week. It's a really uncomfortable team to watch, to be honest. And this is as bad as I've seen it in a long time in terms of what is the team's long-term direction with this current leadership in charge. And is there any reason to really expect any of this to change throughout the rest of the year? And then we'll see what happens at the end of the year. But I still don't think you're going to see any move to, move on from Staley during the season. I don't think it happens. But we'll see. For now, I do think it's on to New England, I guess. But this is a Chargers team that kind of stinks to watch. And I hope there is at least some goodwill gained towards the end of the season in terms of some of these player performances. But that'll do it for me. As always, bolt up, guys. And same time, same place next week